impact study for phase one of their development, which includes those improvements and also includes just outside of the township, which is really a pinch point, I think, for the township as well, for the McMurray, West McMurray, or Nancy intersection. So they're going to be putting in a series of turn lanes on each one of those approaches, as well as a traffic signal. Yeah.
So maybe can we pause there and talk about road infrastructure as it relates to new development? So when I first met Mike, I don't remember it, but I suspect it was probably a nasty experience because most likely we were on opposing sides of the table and wanted two very different things. I've come to like Mike and learn to understand his perspective. And it's important that we understand that we can't just draw lines on the map and then hope for the best and hope somebody else is going to build it. Yes, developers can build infrastructure for you if you have a plan and if you have the tools that you have available to you to implement that plan. For example, PRDs is not the end all. There is flexibility there. You cannot require anybody to do offsite improvements. As Mike well knows, I spent a lot of my time when I worked for a municipality doing that arm twisting to get infrastructure improvements. But at the end of the day, that only gets you so far. It only works until it doesn't. And in Cecil Township's lifespan, it's not going to work much longer for you. Because as you get higher profile, as you get larger development, the developers are just going to say, no. So what you need to do is have the plan in place and have the tools available to you. So Mike and I can talk to you about some of those tools to plant some seeds now in terms of having an infrastructure plan, having the priority list, thinking about impact fees, thinking about official maps.
Taking overlay districts.
Right, so there are lots of tools that we can implement if the township wants to be proactive in terms of planning for that roadway infrastructure. So down the pike, Mike, I mean, areas where you think that development may occur, but infrastructure is lacking, I mean, do we think that these are tools that we should be thinking about now?
Why didn't we, question, why did we not do an impact fee here somewhere?
I don't know, why didn't you?
I don't remember the answer.
Yeah,
I asked 5 years
I've
ago.
asked that question.
Well, because somebody like Mike in his previous life probably told you that it'll chase development out of your community and nobody
would
wants
They
to
tried
develop.
with Joe DeMardo.
My old boss would say,
We went there,
Yes.
Yeah, we tried to do
I
it.
think a perfect example is, and I don't know where it's gone since I've been a supervisor, when we talked about doing the Coal Valley, they talked about putting in a sewage plant for that. Are they still talking about that with the development of Coal Valley, or is that going by the wayside? Because that was part of the initial plan. How they were talking about it, I don't know.
I don't know if we're
John,
challenged in multiple areas.
I think that's what's been holding that
Hold on,
plan
hold on,
up.
we've got
Is the
multiple
sewage?
conversations happening here. So we're talking about, somehow we got the sewer from transportation, that's okay.
Well,
Sewer in Pool Valley.
What I'm trying to say is we discussed that, the sewage, because there was going to be a massive development there, and to put that into Cannonsburg was going to be a problem. And in the beginning, whenever we worked on that, the person that we worked with doesn't even work for that company anymore, but there was talk of a sewage plant being built down over the hill, down towards where the gas station is. It's a mess that you're talking about, down in that area down there, which would basically take care of that. And that's part of what you want to do when you do a big development like that, is make sure that you have the sewage put in.
And the sewerage has to come first before any development, because look at Canonsburg right now. South Point overloaded Canonsburg.
No.
Huh?
No, that's not true.
It's not.
Cannonsburg is not overloaded. South Point sends very small percentage of customers.
Okay, so that means that I can connect to the sewerage system that is connected onto my property without any problem. Is that what you're saying?
No, Cannonsburg right now is a mess, as you see in the newspaper, but South Point didn't overload it.
South Point's got their own?
No, South Point is going to Cannonsburg, but South Point community did not create an overload situation at Cannonsburg.
It did it first before they redeveloped it.
They made it years and years and years ago.
Well-
You know what?
Just 2 years ago, there was a moratorium on South Point.
Yes.
Getting in there until they did those improvements. 2
Absolutely.
years ago.
Because right now.
And now that's what they're
right
saying,
now-
they gave them 5 million or whatever it is, now they want 10.
Okay, right now.
Right.
They are revamping their whole, because they realized they had, what was it, improper flow meter data. So if you read the newspapers, it's all plastered in the
Well, we're in the
newspapers.
Townships,
Yeah, I know.
no one has the real facts, that's the
She's
problem.
on the municipal authority, so she kind of.
She's in the suit as well.
So back to transportation
An impact fee.
and impact fees.
Why is it that our municipality never did impact fee requirements? I don't remember, it was before my time, but was it because,
Is it legal?
it wasn't
Oh, it's
legal?
that-
Oh, it's absolutely
Yeah.
legal.
Well, I mean, when you say before your
They
time,
tried to
it-
do that.
There's legislation, there's legislation in place
That
that
they
you can
place
establish.
it.
but what was the
What?
year? Because that didn't happen, it didn't happen until 19,
Yeah, I just
80
know
something.
trustee Phil straight in order that they can
I
do it.
forget, I think it's 80,
He won.
80,
Well, I think it was 92.
No, we
but I
can't
can't-
enact an impact fee.
You 100% now. I'm saying there might have been development where you tried it 30 years ago, and you know there were a couple of communities dabbling with
But
it.
that's why
Define
we
an
have
impact
it.
fee?
So if you have a plan for transportation infrastructure,
What are
and
the requirements for an impact fee? What do you have to do besides spend a lot of money?
you do have to spend money.
Yes.
So and there's no answer that I have for you that's free.
No, what's a guess on what it would cost?
You got to spend money to make money. So if you spend the money to come up with a
For,
plan,
Cecil Township.
how much to do this?
Yes.
Do the plan?
It's a three-step plan, so there's a land use component to it that a planning agency would do, and then the traffic portion of it is the roadway sufficiency analysis, which is essentially an evaluation of all of the infrastructures and intersections throughout the township. And then from that, and combined with the planning document, if the township were to develop over time as planned, whatever that plan shows, you would have a series of improvements, transportation capital improvements that would have to be done to accommodate that new development. That township-wide study identifies what those improvements are that are attributable to the development, the full development of the township. From that, you take the trips that would be generated from all of that development, and you divide it by the total cost of that capital improvement, and then there's a per trip fee. So any development that comes in, residential, retail, office, whatever it happens to be, you estimate the number of trips that it's going to generate, and they pay the fee times whatever that per trip fee is. That goes into a separate bank and is used towards making the improvements that have been identified in that plan as being necessary over time. So what happens? So the issue is now is that when I started out, what I said was, aside from those few state roads, most of the roads are local roads. And what we've seen recently with a lot of the PRD developments that have come in, they're all coming in on township roads. So you're very limited by the municipality's planning code as to what you can require when a development comes in on a township road. And specifically, you cannot require off-site traffic improvements. Now, you can require or you can request some reasonable improvements as part of a PRD, okay? But there's a point to what becomes reasonable to a developer, and then it gets to a point where they deem it no longer reasonable, and essentially they either go away or they would win in a court battle. So you're kind of limited. When it comes to state roads, if you're developing on a state road and you need an access permit from PennDOT does have the ability to require off-site traffic improvements. The problem that's happening in the township is everybody's developing on the township roads, and then as these things build out, they're going to overburden those roads, and there's no mechanism to make improvements.
So, an example on this, the Traditions of America plan is going in off Han Road.
Yeah.
And anybody's familiar with how Han Road comes out onto West McMurray.
You should see my letter.
I know what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
oh, no, I did see it on general planning question. We went through that with them already. And then you have the added complication, and not only is West McMurray not part of their plan, they're not coming out on they don't have access off West McMurray, it's off of Han, but West McMurray isn't
Isn't even in our town.
even in our township, it's in North Maine. Now, they're open to that discussion. We had that discussion with them, they're open to that discussion, and now it's in the Board of Supervisors' hands, but, I mean, these are real issues that we have where, even though West McMurray Road's not in Cecil Township, let's face it, it affects almost every Cecil Township resident.
So if you were to go through that process, to develop an impact fee ordinance, which is not cheap, it's an expensive process, probably $100,000 to $150,000 beginning to end.
100 to,
$100,000 to $150,000. But once it's done, it's done. You would identify, especially over here in the western side of the township, which is still pretty rural. You've got, the 980 and 50, and there are some key intersections that, if this stuff all develops back on the township roads, all of that traffic eventually is going to overburden some of those intersections. If you don't identify that early and have capital improvement projects anticipated, as each developer comes in, they're happy to pay an impact fee. That's their fair share, but they don't want to pay as the full cost. So now you've got a mechanism to start collecting these funds, and when the pot gets big enough and an area develops enough that you need that improvement, you make that improvement with money you've collected instead of waiting for the very last developer. What usually happens, the last developer comes in, he happens to be touching a state road, and the state says, well, if you want a permit, you've got to put in a turn lane and a signal, you have to do this, you have to do that. And they go, well, all these other guys developed up on a township road didn't do anything. And then PennDOT will say, well, the township shouldn't allow that, and it's kind of a battle of the agencies at that point. So, I mean, there are tools, and that is a good tool for a municipality like Cecil. He referenced, me saying that they're not necessarily a good idea. I will say that there are lots of communities where I would never recommend that they go for transportation impact fee. But a very, relatively rural community still that has a lot of capacity to develop more, that's really what the legislation is for. That's what that ordinance is for, a township like Cecil.
I'm going to recommend, and I'd like to talk to you more about this, that we implement this for Cecil Township, so that many of our problems can be alleviated if, when, and where there is development, if this impact fee requirement is on the books.
Yeah, and not to get too much in the weeds, but that's a great point, and I want to make sure that we understand too that nothing is free, unfortunately. So, again, we might be getting a little too in the weeds, but this is an important tool that will definitely have a huge impact in the future. You can't make me, if I'm a developer, you can't make me pay for problems that are out there now. So what's going to happen is you're going to start if you did this, you'll collect money to mitigate the impacts of future development. But if that future development impacts an existing intersection, for example, that has problems that are the bane of your existence now, it's not going to fix it. So guess who has to come up with the rest of the money if you want to fix it when that development goes in, if it's not at their front door. So let me back up. Black and white. If it's at the development's front door, they have to fix it. It never works out that clean though, right? I mean, it's just not that simple. But they have to fix it at their front door. Off-site improvements, they do not have to fix. If you have a transportation impact fee program, you can require funds to go into a pot, as Mike said, to fund off-site improvements. They're not going to fund 100% of it, so the township has to have a plan in place to be ready to, with other tax dollars or other sources of revenue, fill that gap to get those improvements done. Otherwise, you're going to sit and wait until you collect up all this money. And it's going to be too late.
John, one of the questions I have is what Bill brought up earlier. When you are designing these new developments, okay, do you have to keep the minimum road size the way it is? Could you make them a little bit wider? Make all of them, recommend to the boards that they have them, instead of the minimum width,
So you
which
can't.
is 16, 17,
So
make it a little bit wider. I know, I was just over on the other side of the state, Lebanon County, visiting my daughter, and their developments over there are a lot wider than over here. And it's not, Jonestown isn't anywhere near as big as Cecil
Are you
Township.
talking about within the development?
Yeah, the actual road within there,
I mean,
instead of being.
what they're
set
designing
here.
within the development meets the current township's road standards.
That's what I'm saying.
Nothing
I think
new is
what Bill
going
had
into
mentioned is that we need to go ahead and say, maybe the roads need to be, instead of 16 feet, maybe make them 20 or whatever. And make them a little wider. It'd be easier to get the EMS people in there and everything else.
And then also, because we get liquid fuels, we have to use certain requirements and you have to follow this. I mean, that really.
So those are two different things, so.
I know, but it's still